Welcome back to the Federal Executive Forum on Federal News Network. We're talking about CDMs. We were talking specifically about priorities. And I'm going to throw it up to you, Gary, and talk about priorities at Veterans Affairs. Give us your number one top line priority in regards to where we are with the CDM program, what you want to accomplish.
You bet. So I'd say our number one priority is the data quality. Through the integration of all these various tools across the integrated geographically dispersed environment of the VA, it's complicated. And so there's been monumental efforts to try and ensure that as we begin to bring these tools together and they share information back and forth, that we can rely upon that data for decision making. And so again, I mentioned we're integrated with FireEye, we're integrated with QRadar. We've done a lot of the FSMA containerization activities so that we can integrate it into the EMAS tool that we brought on board for our authorization processing. And then we're also bringing it forward into our ServiceNow platform as well. So, you know, all of these things begin to integrate, and the most important thing is that can you rely upon the data? So lots of efforts across the board to make sure that can happen. But I think that, and why would we do that? Because I think it dovetails with exactly what Egan was talking about. It's all about risk management and risk decision making, ensuring that the business has the capacity to make the right decisions. Because one thing we've noticed across the board is that there are lots of capabilities that people want to bring to bear to meet the needs of the veteran, specifically within the medical community. And we want to make sure that we can look at those things as it relates to the risk that they present within the environment and do that in a manner that ensures that we understand what that risk is and that we do that in a quick time fashion so that there's not massive delays in bringing forward these new technologies, because the veteran deserves it and they need it.
Fantastic. I love the idea of sort of time to market for, again, as you just mentioned, a very important client, which is our cherished veterans. Jim, let me throw it over to you at Fortinet. Number one priority for you all going forward over the next 6 months.
So look, you've already mentioned time, and I think I would highlight the C part of CDM, continuous. You can't be continuous.
Good catch there, by the way, on the continuous.
Without automation. And we're not only focused on the technical part of saying we see it in terms of diagnostics and response, but the higher level automation, the ability to have playbooks to say, work with your federal partner to say, if we see X occurring, policy-driven automation will say we're going to respond in Y or Z fashion. We are also trying to help build out this ecosystem. I said there's a half a dozen big platforms that really provide the underpinning, the ability to integrate and orchestrate all of this. We've got over 300 vendors in our partner alliance. We recognize the federal government has got a lot of legacy stuff. You want to facilitate the interoperability between those existing deployments. People aren't going to do rip and replace. And then finally, working with each federal partner to say, you all have different legacy deployments. So how can we help you migrate, especially in the areas of cloud, mobility, and remote, and that software-defined networking that I described in my 2 success stories.
Continuous being the key word. Gonna throw out one lesson learned question, and I'm gonna do it with Kevin, and then we're gonna start from the back of the batting order and work our way back up for a wrap up. But Kevin, you run this program. Top lesson learned since you've been running this program, plus or minus?
The top lesson learned, really from an acquisition standpoint, we needed to take into account the complexity we see across the federal government in terms of the various missions, the legacy systems in place, the various technologies used throughout the federal government, and create an acquisition approach that could account for that. As mentioned, we recognized that a rip and replace approach wouldn't work. Many of these agencies had solutions that worked already. We needed the flexibility to interact with systems already in place, the flexibility to fill in gaps where needed, to pull all of that data together and really bring value, working with our partners in the industry, bring value to the agencies in terms of getting that cybersecurity visibility. So the key for me from a lessons learned standpoint and what we've been able to deliver with our defend task orders is that flexibility.
Right. I think, being the continuous, in order to be continuous, you must be flexible. And you guys have, again, your organization has done a brilliant job of doing that. So we thank you for that. All right. We're going to wrap it up with this last question. And this one's about painting a picture of the future, right? What does it look around the corner over the horizon? Give us some insight as to, sort of what's cooking, if you will, in the perspective organizations and agencies. David, let's start with you at Micro Focus.
Sure. Probably one of the areas that I see advancing is the ability to encrypt data in use. We've had a lot of hard policies and laws about encryption in transit, as well as encryption at rest for data. But the technologies, one of which we offer within our Voltage product, is to encrypt data in use that allows you to perform analytics and other, for your call center or your CRM tools and your ERP tools, where you can protect a lot of that privacy data and PII data within your applications in use. So if they are, breached, a lot of the information is still protected because it's in an encrypted but usable, format. So we've had some success, especially in the healthcare agencies, with rolling that out. And it turns out they really like the ability they can generate test data. So they're not using their production data to do testing. And I think it's the whole management of that data and the data lifecycle is going to be the future, and for protecting a lot of the data that CDM is meant to defend.
Fantastic. I know there's a lot of folks that are really comforted to hear that, right? If you can neuter that data and God forbid somebody gets a hold of it, not an issue, right? Fantastic concept. Egan, how about Atanium? I know you all have a lot of cool stuff going on in that Petri dish. Can you give us some insight?
Yeah, I think what we're trying to address is we sort of have this disease as humans that we tend to deify data, and the more that we can collect and consolidate in one place, the more we do that. What we're trying to really get across and help customers with is this understanding of true real-timeness, right? Not I can move this data and consolidate it here and then contextualize it after the fact, but understanding that context comes from the state that the endpoint was in at the moment that data was collected, and every second that ticks by, that data is becoming stale and therefore less accurate. And so what we're trying to help people do is get that true real-time understanding of their ecosystem, so that when, if you have an endpoint that downloads PII data or disconnects from the VPN or anything that happens on that endpoint, that should be reflected in real time in terms of the risk portfolio or risk profile rather of that endpoint. And therefore on the enterprise as a whole. And that's especially true now that we're in a state where the vast majority of the workforce is distributed. But that's a really difficult thing to do. The tendency, again, is let's collect data, analyze it, and try to contextualize it after the fact. And we're trying to bring that true real-time context awareness where we allow people to see the state of the endpoint as it exists right now, and 1 second from now, and 2 seconds from now, and so on. And that's a difficult problem to solve, but that literally is why we exist as a company. So.
Yeah, that flash to bang needs to get to close to zero as possible. And let's face it, stale data, stale information means stale decision making, right? And so I applaud you all for recognizing that and being able to get that capability in the hands of the decision makers to make good risk-based decisions. Jim, how about over at Fortinet? I know you all are always cooking up new capabilities over there. Give us some insight as to what we can expect over the next, year or two.
So Luke, I'd build on the comments of both Egon and Dave. It's all about the data. And in the CDM context, it's about characterizing it in real time, being able to say, I know normal, I know abnormal, and I can mitigate the potential consequences from abnormal. And as I've said, these platforms that exist out there in the cybersecurity ecosystem are doing a pretty good job of being able to do that in real time. Just pick an ecosystem and try to stay within that ecosystem. The problem for federal agencies is you have a lot of cases where you don't want either the data or even telemetry about the data to go to somebody's off-premise data center. So what excites me is we're getting to the ability with this AI-driven automation to give that kind of capability to agencies to be able to deploy in-house. It drives me crazy, both as a taxpayer and a former federal executive, to hear agencies talking about building the AI to do threat analytics in-house. I go, look, the private sector has spent over 10 years learning to do that, leverage what we're doing. We're getting to the point where we can give you something we call a virtual security analyst that you can deploy in the environment. It reports into your SOC. It starts 99% plus accurate and gets better. You own it. It can do augmentation, threat discovery, and response. Take advantage of what the private sector's done. The final part I would say is we're getting to the point now, I think, in the industry of being able to offer CDM as a service. We've been talking to big agencies on this program. They have large, sophisticated capability. We know there's a lot of small agencies that, just as they had to consume TIC as a service through MTIPS, are frankly going to look for somebody to do the same thing on CDM. And I know there are some systems integrators out there in the ecosystem that are now starting to offer CDM as a service.
Well, I think you may be teeing up Mr. Cox for his closing comments, but I'll hold and keep my powder dry on that one. But you're raising some very good points, and very interesting to hear about some of those concepts that are going to be implemented. Well, speaking of a federal executive official, Gary, what can, 2 years from now, veterans got a lot of capability. You all are starting to implement telemedicine. Blue Button, I guess, is a few years old. What can a veteran expect, in the next couple of years? What were you guys cooking up over there to take that experience to yet the next level?
Well, I think that's it's interesting that you mentioned that with the telehealth, because that has really been one of the predominant motivators behind what's been happening within VHA. And I just want to put this in perspective too. We also have VBA, NCA, and they are massive. The benefit.
What are VBA and MCA for those that may not know?
Veterans Benefits Administration, National Cemetery Administration. So, I mean, it's again, soup to nuts kind of capability set to meet the needs of the veteran. But what I would say is that all part of that and essential to that is, and these were some of the themes that were mentioned, what we're looking at internally within the VA is how can we use behavioral analytics to understand the behaviors across the IoT, IOMT environment, and then be able to reconcile that information to determine, is there a threat, is there an issue, is there a risk, and then put this in context within what's happening within all the infrastructure that we have that constitutes this apparatus of ISCM capabilities that we're using to help assess our environment. And this is particularly true as we move out on the EHR initiative with DoD. We've got to understand what is happening within the environment and be able to report it and respond to it accordingly. And I think that that's really one of the major focus areas for the department. So from the veterans' perspective, they can continue to rely upon the fact that the VA is protecting their data in as optimum way as is humanly possible, with as many tools and capabilities as that we can bring to bear to do precisely that. And we're continuing to push the envelope to the next level through the use of innovative capabilities and behavioral analytics.
And I would just say, you make a good point. I want to call out not just the veterans, but certainly their families that get involved in these benefits, and of course the burial and burial services. And I would just point out, if you've never been to a military burial service in a veterans facility, is one of the most solemn and moving experiences you'll ever have. So hats
Agreed.
off to all of you. James, how about at SBA? I know there's a lot of activity going on over there. You guys went from 100 miles an hour to 1,000 miles an hour, and probably learned a lot from that as well. What can one expect? What can a small business owner expect over the next year or so as you all continue to improve the goods and services even better than you're doing today?
So one of the big initiatives that was started under the CIO Maria wrote with the respect and approval from the various administrators, is being carried through with our new CIO, Keith Bluestein. It's improving the small business experience, the customer experience when they interact with SBA. Right. So that's the really big drive, big initiative that is ongoing throughout the agency. From a security perspective, it's all about us getting to automation. I love a good football analogy. So what makes a cornerback great? The ability to read, react, stay on the hip pocket of a receiver, so that you can knock down that ball. Now imagine that ball is a risk. it needs to become automatic in your mind to say, hey, the ball's in the air, I need to go swat it down or intercept it. That's where automation comes into play. Automation to me is that good cornerback. That's the big push that we need to do, is leverage CDM to get to really solid automation to not only have beautiful dashboards, but respond to threats in near real time.
And ultimately improve that customer experience. I love the fact that you're highlighting that. I really do appreciate everything you're doing over there. Kevin, you've laid out a whole bunch of activities over there. What's the next chapter to this journey? What can we expect from the CDM program over the next year or 2 years?
So one of the things I want to just close and highlight is a key value of the CDM program is partnership. Everything that we've done, everything that we're going to do in the future is going to be in partnership with our agency partners, as well as with our industry partners. The folks here on this session, on this panel, as well as our many other partners throughout the federal agencies and within industry. In working with all these partners, our key, as I mentioned throughout, is in FY21 to really achieve the promise of CDM as we originally set out. We want to get the new dashboard in place that is scalable, that is high performance, that is flexible, that has better visualization capabilities to help the agencies, as Jim had mentioned, with it's been mentioned many a time, with risk management, getting in front of the risk, understanding the risk. Associated with getting that new dashboard in place, we also want to ensure that the data quality coming up from the sensors and the scanners is there. It's being reported in a timely fashion. And then also in 21, operationalizing that data. Again, showing the promise of CDM, helping the agencies understand what their security posture is, which is a key component of risk, so that they can continue to reduce their attack surface, continue to improve their overall cybersecurity posture, so that at the end of the day, we can get in front of the threat, get in front of the adversary, and keep them away from our most critical data, our most critical mission areas.
Fantastic, and I really appreciate the wrap up there. Super exciting to see that, and I think we're all looking forward to realizing this dream that you've just laid out for us in 2021. Well, that's going to wrap it up for us, and I want to really thank all of the guests on today's show for taking the time from their busy schedules to join us for this program. I'd also like to thank the sponsors for supporting us on the show. I'd like to thank the good people here at Federal News Network that make our program so successful and enjoyable. And most of all, I'd like to thank you, the listening audience that tune in every month. You're listening to the Federal Executive Forum, part of the Federal News Network.